All right, so let's kick things off. We can catch anyone up who joins late. Um, so thanks for joining us today on August 27th for our webinar on Kubernetes Governance 101. So we recently released the first part of a series of blog posts on Kubernetes governance. And really what we're trying to get at here with Kubernetes governance is, we noticed that there is a dearth of content that helps DevOps leads and DevOps leaders really get into the nitty gritty of how Kubernetes policy enforcement should work across their entire cloud native stack. So whether they're on-prem, whether they're hybrid cloud, whether they're on only one technology, we really started to hear from a lot of our customers and from a lot of the community that enforcing policy for instance, how to deploy to prod on cloud native technologies like Kubernetes is kind of becoming a huge headache with RBAC and managing permissions and all that kind of stuff. So we started by, kind of going out in the community and listening to these concerns and then putting out, in particular, our CTO, Ahmed Badran, who's on this call and is going to lead you through the webinar today, put out a great first part where we will send to all of the attendees today. And the thing is, reading about these things is fine, but at the end of the day, you really need to get a live demonstration of a lot of this stuff. So that's why you put this thing together today for all of you. Thanks for joining us. A quick intro for me. I'm Jahed Momand, head of marketing and growth at Magalix. Been with the company for about a year, and I'll kick it over to my colleague, Ahmed Bazran, who's our CTO, to take it the rest of the way.
Thank you, Jahed. Thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully everything is looking good. Let me share my screen so we can kick this off. All right, I hope everyone can see this fine.
Yep.
So welcome everyone. This webinar is about the Kubernetes Governance 101. We'll also talk about how to create a custom advisors using Rego and with Magalix. If these things don't make sense yet, well, that's why we have this webinar. So my name is Ahmed Badran. I'm the CTO here at Magalix. And just to give you a little bit about myself before we get started. So I've been in this, I guess, profession for some time now. I worked at AWS back in the day in 2005 when they were building kind of the whole cloud concept. They were just launching S3 and EC2, and this whole new idea was coming about. So it was interesting back then to see kind of the journey and how things evolved since then. And even as I moved to other companies at Disney or Limelight and Blue Origin, there was definitely something fundamentally changing. And my journey kind of, as it took me through my career, showed me kind of the power of moving, kind of how the cloud enabled a lot of new ways of doing things that were not possible before. And that came with a lot of great opportunities. At the same time, it also came with a lot of interesting challenges and responsibilities that we didn't used to have before. So as I've seen Amazon and how they did their cloud infrastructure and kind of they were doing microservices and all of that before even that term existed. And even the struggles they went through back then in 2005, and certainly have evolved a lot since. But it was interesting as I went, for example, to Disney, they still had struggles. Those concepts were not there, and we went through a journey of going to microservices. Same thing at Limelight. We were managing this massive ingestion pipelines of old videos, terabytes of data, trying to scale our infrastructure, trying to leverage the cloud. S3, actually, we were at AWS at the time, these elastic resources, and we were trying to manage things back in the day by hand. Containers were just, didn't even exist back then. Blue Origin, it's just a space company, just kind of collecting massive amount of data, all the telemetry from a space vehicle, and also going through the journey. They had some monolith back in the day, and they wanted to go to microservices as well because they wanted to move fast. So all those promises, and I was, lucky enough to have been at these companies and see them go through this journey. But one thing you realize is like a lot of people go through a lot of pain. And there's got to be a better way. And that's when I met Mohammed, the CEO here at Magalix. We kind of shared a similar vision. He also comes from a background, worked at AWS and Azure at some time. So we've seen those similar problems, and we've seen a lot of customers struggling with it. So that was interesting. So let's jump into it. Because when you think about this cloud native challenge, the new way of doing things, moving from kind of the monolith world to microservices, moving from the old way of doing things to trying to be kind of the DevOps culture, removing isolation, silo teams, trying to drive more collaboration and automation in your infrastructure, taking advantage of all these cloud technologies from Amazon, from Google, from Azure, but the old paradigm, it's a big change. And one of the big challenges back then is this developers versus operators, your dev team versus your ops team. And the kind of, the devs will build things and they kind of throw it over the wall to the operation team and it's like, deal with it. So there is kind of the agility where the development team want to keep moving fast. They're adapting Agile, Scrum, and Kanban, and all these processes. They move into microservices. So now things are more distributed. Instead of one thing that we need to know about from the operation perspective, now there's a lot of multiple small things. From the development perspective, that is awesome. You break in the problem into smaller problems so you can tackle them independently, and you can use the right technology for each of those. But as you distribute your architecture, you also distribute the responsibilities. You distribute your problems in a way. And that ended up being a challenge in the operation side because now we have a variety of things we need to maintain and worry about. Not everything is conforming to the same standards, different technologies. and if you ask any operation person, live incidents in production, they happen 90% of the time because somebody changed something. Either they changed some code and they just deployed this new thing, or they changed some configuration. And what happens there is you get this tension between the ops team and the development team. So the ops teams naturally start kind of pushing back on the development team. It's like, you guys need to slow down, or you should not have access to production. We should review maybe everything. Maybe the ops start talking about, stop. We just need to review everything. We'll start doing PR for everything. Well, that naturally will slow down. And the thing is, there's got to be a better way. And this is not a challenge that is unique to small companies. All these companies have those things, and they write blogs about them, and they've been going at it for some time. Some obviously have been doing better than others, but we all been struggling with this, and this is kind of the modern day challenge of moving to the cloud native. Obviously, there's other challenges. We're not saying agility versus stability is the only challenge, but this is the one we want to focus on today, because we think there is a solution, and we can talk about how the governance frameworks and where these things come from. But it's good to motivate the problem by understanding kind of where some of this is coming from. So for today's webinar, the objective is we will talk about governance, why it's important. We'll talk about how to establish a governance framework in your organization. We'll also talk about some of the open source technology that could help you with that, because you don't want to do things manually. You want to leverage technology to automate that process for you. So Open Policy Agent is a great open source framework, and the Rego language, it's a policy, it's a declarative policy language. And then we will show you as well how you can leverage Magalix. So you don't have to do also the extra overhead of setting up all these things yourself and trying to maintain it. You want to focus on your customer and the things that are more valuable to them. You don't want to be spending a lot of time just setting up things. And when you can, when you have a solution elsewhere that you can leverage. So we'll talk about how Magalix could help you with a feature we have called custom advisors. And as well, we'll talk how to integrate the things we're going to talk about also into your workflow as an engineering team. All right. So the flow of the webinar today is actually going to be based on an actual story. So instead of like trying to just have slides, let's talk about a problem that we actually faced at Magalix to motivate this and kind of to tie things and show you how something like this could evolve in your organization. Now, this is a particular example, but obviously it is just kind of you can really replace the particular problem we had with something else that is very similar, but the framework, the steps are just going to be the same. So this was a while back. One of our SRE in Slack noticed an application that was running like a workload, a controller running in our dev environment, and he didn't know what that was. So it's like, hey guys, who owns this? What is this? It was late in the day. Took some time until we figured out, but there were some questions going on. It's like, hey, could this be malicious? Is this even, maybe we have a security compromise here, or this is running, but who should we contact? The SRE at the time was trying to upgrade some things in infrastructure in our dev environment, and he wasn't sure because this was an application he wasn't aware of. Could he restart it? Is it safe to restart? Is that going to cause problems? And he wanted to know who's the person so they can talk to. And this is naturally, as you have a big organization, you distributed the responsibilities between microservices. There's a lot of people working on different things. You cannot possibly know who's working on what all the time. You can't scale your organization if you're going to keep tabs on everything like that. So we start thinking about, okay, so we solved the solution. Eventually we find the person, but it took us a while. It was somebody was working on some new prototype and he was trying some new idea. Some engineer working with one of our business development leads to develop some really cool new prototype for something. But it took us a while. And this was a security issue, or this was in production and we needed to really know the person quickly so we can troubleshoot the problem and recover from the live incidents and bring the production back to stable state. So should we block all engineers from maybe deploying until we review things, or they let us know what's going on? Should we force a PR or no, there's got to be a better way. But that, as you adopt the SRE, the site reliability engineering, the idea is you want to be thinking about how to automate these things. You don't want to do things manually. So let's talk about this. Well, if this is what a governance problem looks like, you basically have something and you want to establish some policy around it. Maybe the policy is, in this case, all workloads running in production, they should have an owner. And we should somehow signify who's the owner of this workload. So if we have an incident or an issue, or we need to reach that person, we have. I mean, it doesn't have to be an individual. It could be a mailing list for the team or the group that owns it, or their on call, so you can reach them at. So whatever it might be. But that's an interesting policy. It's a very useful policy. And we thought about it, why don't we do that? And that's really, I mean, governance is one of those words that a lot of maybe business people or execs use, but at the end of the day, it's really simple. It's the ability of your operation team to verify and enforce certain policies, standards. Everybody has some standards, some best practices, some guidelines that they want to enforce in their production environment, or even, I mean, regardless. Maybe your dev environment is a little different from your production environment, so you want to do it by environment, or you want to do it for specific clusters, or you want to do it across your whole organization. It doesn't matter what level, but this is kind of what the government's problem is and what it looks like. And this is one of the ways you can help manage the relationship between the agility versus stability problem we talked about. You want your development team to be moving quickly. You want still some rules and policies to be enforced and applied so they can move quickly, but then we can automate those checks so we know, just like you do in your unit tests for your code. You don't push to production and then people manually, I mean, you want to do code reviews, but you don't want to do it for every single line of code for everything. So you do unit tests. So as part of your build, as part of even after a deployment, you might be doing smoke tests. You want a different layers so you can check and validate and enforce the best practices you have. So what are examples of best practices? I mean, we just talked about one. Every workload should have an owner so we don't get into this problem again. Or no workload container should be running as root. There's a lot of other examples, and we'll cover some of those later in the webinar, but let's continue with this one scenario we have. So to establish a governance framework, there is 3 things you need to kind of specify. First one is target. Which entities are you going to apply this policy to? So we want to put owner. We want to declare or define an owner for every workload. So every workload. So that is all the stateful sets, all the replica sets, anything that runs in our environment and our clusters. So basically your workloads, your controllers. So that's going to be the target for this particular policy we're talking about. What is the policy? We thought about it and we thought maybe, we should put a label called owner. And the value of that could be email or name of the person or the name of the team or their alias, so we can reach them in Slack or a PagerDuty, or what have you. So that is the policy we want to enforce. We want to enforce that every workload have a label with a value. Triggers. Okay, how do we enforce this policy? Because if you have a policy that is not enforced, it's the same as having nothing. Because think about it, if you don't have a policy or you want to automate it, what was the alternative? And we discussed some of those internally when we were thinking about this problem. Well, we can create an Excel sheet where we put all the workloads in a column, and then we put the owners and even secondary owners and whatever we want to add, but imagine just owners in the second column. Okay, that's good. That maybe solves the problem initially, but then what happens? Well, new engineers will join the team and they will build new things, so they now have to remember. So now we're relying on people remembering. Human errors are just people forget, people, don't realize maybe they didn't read your policy. So what do you do if you can't enforce your policy? So that's why you want to be thinking about these things. And the trigger is, when do you want to enforce the policy? Do you want to run it once a day? Do you want to run it as part of your code pipeline, CI/CD pipeline? Or do you want to check it every time something gets deployed to your cluster? So for us, we just said we're going to run this. The target is going to be all the workloads in our cluster. The policy is every workload should have a label. And the label should be named owner and has a value for a name or an email. The trigger, for now we were fine. Just every 24 hours, just run a check. So we will find all violations. All violators of this policy will be kind of reported. That's sufficient for now. So that's kind of how we were thinking about this problem, and we're trying to kind of implement this governance framework internally. So we walk in kind of through, it was kind of, thinking out loud together here to kind of show you the process we went through and how you can establish this. Obviously, the first time you're doing it, it takes a little bit and you're trying to figure all these things out. But once you do one example like we're going through now, you should be able to apply the same thing for different policies, and it becomes easier and easier. Okay, so we were just talking about this, and obviously we need to automate it. Otherwise, this whole thing is just kind of a very manual process that is going to be prone to fail. And you're going to always be in this firefighting mode. Things are breaking, things are missing, and it's just, I don't know who's the owner. Well, they forgot to change the Excel sheet. And instead of you spending your time in your innovation mode, where you're doing your development team, your operation team, you're working on things that have value to the customer, you value to your business, you're innovating on behalf of your customer, and you're delivering value as opposed to just kind of running around trying to figuring small things out. Why this is broken? What about this and what about that? So this is one way that could help you, having a governance framework to enforce those basic policies you have. So like we said, just like you have infrastructure as code, if you have Terraform or all these other things where you can, or Chef and Ansible, and you want to automate your deployment and it's like code, well, think of your policy as code. So how could you do that? Well, the OPA, the CNCF has this open source project, Open Policy Agent, which is a policy execution engine. That's what it is. And they have the Rego language, which is a declarative language that you can use to write policies. And we'll go through the examples so you can see it, but I wanted to mention it here, and so you will have the slides and have that link, but obviously you can search for this online. So this is kind of where people are converging, and you can do a lot of things with Open Policy Agent, not just kind of the particular examples we're doing, but this is one way you can declare your policies and then have them enforced. So what is the Magalix way? Well, how does Magalix help? Why can't I just go use OPA? Certainly you could, but then you will have to set it up. We just talked about that is just the policy that gives you a way to write your policies, but how do you run it? When do you run it? How often? Where do you install it? All of that. So you could certainly go figure that out. Or, at Magalix, we try to kind of provide you OPA as a service. And we have this kind of offering that's called Cube Advisor, which does a lot of things. First of all, Magalix, when you install our agent, it does get your metrics, but also gets your entities, the objects. It gets you those workloads, the specs. So if you look at this diagram here, to the left side, we get the YAMLs, all the objects, the specs, and we have the policies. And we have some policies that you get it out of the box, actually. There's a lot of best practices in Kubernetes that we already have basically implemented for you. So you'll get those for free out of the box. And then we provide you custom advisors, a way for you to kind of implement your own policies that are specific to your organization. And at the end, we kind of will tell you, which entities, which workloads are compliance with this policy or in violation of this policy. And I have a link here too, so you will have it in the slide deck to go dig more if you wish. But we'll go through kind of a demo of how you go through this yourself. All right, so let's jump to the demo to kind of show you how this whole works. But I would guess some of you are not familiar maybe with Magalix or haven't used it before. So the process is really simple. You can go to magalix.com or our console magalix.com and just sign up. So once you sign up with an email and password, the first thing you will see is we will just basically give you a kubectl command that you can run in your cluster, and that will install our agent. And that's it. It's one step and you're ready to go. So once you set this up, let me here change kind of my screen. Let me share our console. Right, hopefully everyone can see this. Right, so once you log in and you run this kubectl command, it takes a few minutes just kind of for the agent to get started and collect the data. And you will be basically redirected after we generate some recommendations for you. You'll be redirected to our console here, to the main dashboard. This is an example. This is one of our demo accounts, and we have a few clusters already connected, and we show you kind of, already obviously we have advisors running, and we can show you policies, violation, and some kind of just general data about your cluster. So, but let's go to what we just talked about, how to run a new policy. So you can go to KubeAdvisor, the feature, the product we just talked about. Let me log in. Just for you guys my screen so I can see everything that you guys probably are seeing. All right. So there's a list of some of the advisors we already have. You can notice I already have this one, but let's create a new one. So come here, let's call it owner policy advisor. The owner policy advisor. Hopefully you have more better descriptive names to use than this. This is just a demo. So I need to move things around so I can see my buttons here. So you can create then the advisor. And this is just kind of a wrapper. And then we have what's called issue, because you can have multiple issues under this. Maybe you want to validate that it has a label called this, and then maybe you want to have something else. But we'll just focus on creating a single issue here. And let's call it missing owner. You can have a description. You should provide an owner for your workload. So really pre-populated the policy here. Obviously, this is just a template for you, so you can leverage, but we'll talk about that. But let's say how to solve it. You should add, I forgot all the exact place, but it's probably metadata, labels, owner label with the email of the owner. Okay. So what about the policy, the Rego? Well, okay, we put some documentation, you can read about that, but let's simplify it here just kind of for the purpose of the demo here. Let's remove everything and we'll go, here's the minimum you really need. All of these are helper functions for you. This is actually what you need to do. You need to, this is just kind of Rego, and if you're not familiar with Rego, there's obviously, it's an open source thing, so there's a lot of resources that could help you kind of all the advanced feature. I'm not a Rego pro yet, but it's a really nifty policy declaration language. You can use it not just for this, but you can even use it for authentication and some other things, but this is interesting. Now, all you need to do is you give us kind of a rule, just has to be the word violations, and you need to return us an object code results. If you're not familiar with Rego, what Rego is basically is you just give me statements. Every statement is either true or false. Even assignment, if you assign a value, That's a statement, and that's by default is true. But then you will have like equal signs or things like that where you check in, and that could be true or false. If anything is false, then that kind of stops. If it goes all the way down, then you get kind of true. So this is the minimum, but obviously, let's go to the Rego playground. So Rego, it's an open source, like I said. You can go to play.openpolicyagent.org. And actually, they have a lot of examples of things you can also try out. But let's see, here's what I wrote. So how does this policy work? So like I told you, Magalix has already your entities, your workloads. And this is an example of them here. If you look here to the right panel here, there is input. And this is an example of a spec that we have of one of the workloads we have. Here is the policy. So you write the policy, basically you check in against this JSON file. And then the output will come here. So I wrote the policy, if you notice violations, and I wrote it twice because I have kind of two rules I want to enforce. Input is basically, this is like, the way the OPA works is just they give you this input variable that has everything. Basically, this whole JSON is part of the input. So dot metadata dot labels, and I'm checking for owner. And if you look for that, that's this here. So metadata labels, I'm looking for owner. And if it's not, then things are good. I mean, sorry. So we're checking here the violation. So we're saying if it doesn't exist, that is a violation. So the result will be true. Then it is an issue. Issue equal true. And if you look at this particular one, and if you want to, we give you a lot of the output here, but then the result, where did it go? Sorry. So just kind of the result is true. This thing is missing. And of course, I had another policy. So you might say, well, the owner label is here. That's the first piece here. So actually, let me remove this. Let's evaluate. So if you notice, this passes. I don't get a violation equal true or anything because I do have a label called owner, but I'm not checking the value. This is an empty value. So that's why I had this other policy also, because I wanted to check that. Again, let's get the input of the owner key, and just kind of I want to check that at least it has an @ sign. Obviously, you could do more fancy things if you want to really validate that the email address matches, or you want to see if it has a string, or it's not null, it's not empty. You can check all these things. Now, if you evaluate this will be false. False in the sense you have an issue. So this is the idea. We're trying to say if you have an issue, then there will be an output that looks like this: issue equal true. And that's actually how Rego works. It doesn't return anything if everything is good. You return something if something is violating. I mean, again, it's up to you how you can do it with the positive or the negative, depending on how you want to structure your policy on violation. But kind of the Magalix ways, we might give you a function violations and return us issue equal true if there is an issue. Otherwise, don't return anything. And that means your spec here is in compliance. All right, let me say a@gmail.com. Then it's good. I evaluated this, and it seems this policy is fantastic. It's working the way I want. So you can copy that. You can go to the Magalix after you try everything, and that looks good. So that's created. All right. So the issue is created. The advisor has been created. So it will take some time. We don't run them right away. But the default is we run it, like we said, our target or our trigger is we are happy with once a day. So this will take some time for actually run, but let's do like cooking shows. So what do they do in cooking shows? Well, they tell you all the ingredients and stuff, and then they change the screen, and then suddenly they're pulling something out of the oven because they were doing it from before. So I actually had this policy. I called it slightly differently. So I think it's called missing owner label. And if you notice, so basically once this thing runs, you can come to under the cluster of interest to the issues, and you'll see kind of these, what we call them, Cube Advisors best practices, and you can look. So you can go to the missing owner. We have other ones, and we'll talk about some other example of policies you could enforce. So if you click on this one here, so obviously, we had everything in is violating. We don't have it in this cluster. And if you remember here, when we're looking at the missing owner label, 12 out of 12 workloads have this issue. And we've been running this, I introduced this a few days ago, so you can see also the history. So it'll tell me all the workloads that have this issue. So let's say we can click on one of them. Maybe for core things in your kube system, maybe you should have the SRE team, your infrastructure team, to be kind of the owner. So there is an issue with any of them, you know who to call, who to contact. We show you kind of the evidence, the label, the YAML we saw. You see everything here. Yeah, kind of how to resolve it. Obviously, you can put more meaningful information to help your engineers figure out what the issue and how to resolve it. You can link to, like you saw, it was a markup, markdown language, so you can just kind of make it a richer description here of how to resolve the issue and all. So with that kind of an idea, and now we have a way. Now I can go to the developers who own these different services and tell them, hey guys, we need to introduce owners. And every once in a while, I can come check here and see that, hey, you know, this is going down, and hopefully things will get to 0. And if somebody violated this, we will know, because I will get this summary page, and this specific page here will show me which workloads are violating this policy. I don't have to go check an Excel sheet that might be out of date, and I wouldn't know, but this will tell me right away. I see something that is deployed to this cluster that does not have this label. Here it is. Go talk to that person then, or figure it out. But okay, so let's go back to the presentation. All right, where is it? All right. So what we went through here, actually, I have it also as screenshots in the demo, in the slide deck, so you can take a look at it as well, the slide decks after this webinar. And here's just the policy and a link to the playground, so you can go play with various examples I have of different things you could do. This is an example of the recommendation. All right, so is that enough? Because what you notice is I have to go every day to check that dashboard to see if there's a new violation. What if I don't check? You know, if a forest falls in the, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? So it's like if a violation is reported and nobody's looking, is it being enforced? Well, you want to integrate with your workflow. What is your typical workflow? Well, usually, wouldn't it be nice if I can receive an event? So when the violation is detected, and instead of me having to go to the console, couldn't I get just an event letting me know that, hey, you have something, and then take that event and maybe integrate it with Slack, so I get a message. Just like you might have a monitoring system that is sending messages, alerts for issues you might have in production. That would be nice. So we have actually something. So for the earnest of time, we will not be able to talk about all those things. Also, this is part of our beta features, and you can request it for sure if you go to our console. So what Kube Notifier does is actually, so all we need is you need to give us a webhook, and you know, your Slack channel webhook that you want us to send those notifications, those events to. Or if you have Zapier integration, that is even more awesome, because we can send you that event. And in Zapier, you can just build your own workflows that, you know, you want to integrate with Slack, you want to integrate with GitHub, you want to integrate with Jira, you want to integrate with what have you. They have like hundreds of applications you can integrate to. Jira, Google Documents, PagerDuty, you name it, they probably have an integration for it. So we'll send you an event to your Zap in Zapier, and then you kick off your own workflow. So basically, you register your webhook and you will receive events when a new recommendation is generated when there is a violation. And you can tell us, hey, I want it for this particular issue and maybe this particular entity. Maybe you don't care about every entity. You know, certain maybe policies you want to ensure. Maybe for some, it's okay to be in the dashboard. I don't want to be bothered with it. You know, when I want to check for it, I'll go to the dashboard and look it up. But for some other things, you want to be looking. Maybe you want to be notified. So that's one way. That's another way. KubeGuard is more interesting, because what happened here, even with the dashboard and the notifier, What's going on here is this is somebody who already deployed something to your cluster, and now you're being notified about it. So this is kind of after the fact. That's like you have a problem in production, go fix it. All right, but what about prevention? Could I stop bad things, things that are violating my policy from going out in the first place? That would be neat. That would be nice. So we have Kubernetes. This is something we're working on actively, and soon it will be out for beta. But basically, imagine you can integrate with your CI/CD, Circle CI, Jenkins, what have you. So you come to our console and you will get a webhook, and then you can put it in your Circle CI. Just like you can integrate with other things. So imagine now you have your YAML, your spec, your Helm chart thing as you build in your code, and you can run that spec. You can send it to this webhook, and we will run the policies you have for you and report any violations. So it's nice. It's basically a web service API. So you get the response back, and you can even write more logic if you wish. I mean, now it's more programmatic. Now that's even better because you're not depending on people looking at things. Now it's system validating and checking and even stopping things that violate your policy. Now you don't have to do everything in your CI. Maybe certain things, just messages going to Slack is fine. Certain things staying in the dashboard. You will get to decide the trigger. This is basically the triggering mechanism. How do you want it to be triggered? Is it an event, or do you want it's fine to be every 24 hours? I'll just I'll just go to the dashboard, or no, I want to prevent it kind of at the build time. Eventually, there will be an extension to KubeGuard where you can see where it's going, where we can basically stop the deployment. Kubernetes has this mission controls, and we have our agent running in your cluster, and it could receive those kind of notifications or update that something is being deployed, and we can take the spec of what's being deployed, and we can, again, run those same policies and enforce, and then do something. Either we can notify you with a Slack again, or maybe we stop the whole deployment, depending on the severity of the violation, and you get to decide that. All right, so this was an actual example, and we went through and obviously I saw an example in one of our demo clusters, but there is other. You can take the same idea and apply it in a lot of different ways. So with Magalix, there is things we already have for you. Actually, the first two here, readiness probe. What if you have workloads that don't have the readiness probe or the liveness probe defined in the container spec? This is a good practice. You should have that. So that's something you can have a policy for. And actually, Magalix, this is one of the out-of-the-box things you have. You can basically allow privilege escalation. You should have it false. So your container, if there's a security breach, doesn't get root access, must run as non-root. This is another flag or another things you can have in your spec. Replicas, making sure that you have usually at least two replicas, so just for fault tolerance, affinity, pod anti-affinity. Settings, role binding, container image. You want to ensure that your image, the container images, are coming from trusted sources. So unless it's, say, dockerhub.com, don't allow anything else. So developers are not just going trying things out and potentially deploying to your cluster some containers that are not trusted sources, or they have security violations or issues. So that's a policy you could enforce. So these are just examples of some of the things you could do, and also just two examples of things that already Magalix provides for you. But this gives you an idea of how you can now establish a governance framework for your organization, your cluster, and be able to enforce it in an automated manner. So really, to get that synergy back between the development team who wants to move fast, they want to be able to move quickly, and now you give them a way for them to check even at build time, or deployment time, if you could allow that, or at least later, of any violation, so they can go and fix it. And we're working actually on other things where we can then eventually use these owner labels to imagine that if they have another type of violation, let's say maybe they are wasting resources, or they are violating some other thing, you can email them directly or cut a Jira ticket against them. That would be very interesting integration. So you can see where Magalix is going with this. We're really trying to simplify that process. We're trying to create a DevOps culture that is essential, really, as you move to the cloud and you're trying to manage this massive complexity. Again, like when you distribute your architecture, you also distribute this ownership and you distribute your problems. And the only way for you to move fast is you need to be able to automate these things. You still need to establish a set of rules and policies to guarantee the stability of your operation environment, your production environment, and all. With that, I'll turn it back to Jahid. Thank you, everyone, for listening and participating here, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Hey, thanks, Badran. We had a few things put into the chat here, but first, before I get to the chat questions, I wanted to ask: does anyone in the audience want to chime in with a question? We'll wait about 5 seconds. If so, just raise your hand and I'll allow you to talk. All right, well, doesn't look like anyone has any other questions, so I'll just read off the ones that we got from the chat real quick. So first one, do we have out-of-the-box policies? I assume this means policies for Rego policies that come pre-configured.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually, if you go back here, so let me share my other screen. All right, can you see the Magalix console now, I hope?
Yep.
All right, so this is, if you go to the Kube Advisor right here, so you can actually see a list of some of the ones we already built in. So this is an example of a container image tag. If, for example, so this is a policy that checks, when you're deploying images, you don't want to get the latest because you don't, did you test it? So you want to always have a specific version that you're deploying to your production environment. So this particular policy here, and we have the Rego for it, so obviously you feel free to copy, paste, and modify as you wish if you want to create another policy. But we have some of those already. So we have this, we have some related to security, like pod security policies. So actually, this particular advisor has 4 issues that it checks for. Fine-grained breakdown. You want to check privileges, container running as root. That's not good. So you definitely want to have that. So we have certainly some of those things already pre-configured out of the box for users to use, and you can see them here as well.
Cool. We have a couple more. Do you have any plans to have a Rego playground inside the Magalix console?
Absolutely. We want to integrate that. You don't need to go somewhere else, because even when you go to this, who populates this for you, the input? So it would be certainly nice, and that's something definitely in our roadmap and we're working on. It would be cool if you can come here and you can write the Rego, and you can even select one of your actual entities, and then just do the same thing we did there, but now with your own data and you can run it and validate and maybe see even a preview of what the recommendation would look like. So you can see what your engineers will see. So to see if that's useful to them to be able to troubleshoot the issue and fix it.
All right, and the last one here is a couple actually. Can KubeGuard enforce policies inside the cluster?
So this is something we're working on. It's definitely in the roadmap. Because like I mentioned, there is the admission control. And we can have, because we have already our agent which collects data, and we can also have it basically listen to events from the API server. And those are called admission controls. And we can basically watch for those admission control events. And when we see a change, we will run those policies. So this is still in the making. If you're interested in that feature, certainly get in touch with us and we can talk more about it, but it's definitely in the roadmap. And I think that provides a lot of interesting capabilities to enforce your governance framework, which is really important.
And lastly, this one, can the Magalix agent act as an admission controller inside Kubernetes? I believe that that's exactly what OPA does, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. That's basically, that's the direction we want to go, and we certainly can make that happen. It's on the roadmap.
Cool. So before we sign off then, is there anyone else amongst the participants who would like to ask a question? Otherwise we can wrap up, and we'll send you a link to this recording, as well as a copy of one of our ebooks, which we'll be sending to all of you. And also, just a note for those of you in the audience, we are going to be releasing an ebook soon on Kubernetes governance in general, with specific problems and solutions we've identified that we would want anyone who is starting at sort of the 101 level for Kubernetes governance to know. we'll watch for that in the coming weeks.
Cool.
And
Sounds
from
good.
the looks of it, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So we'll kind of just leave it here then. And thanks a lot for joining today. And we'll end the webinar here. And as I said, watch for our upcoming ebook on Kubernetes governance. And as always, we've launched 5 other webinars in the series as well. So you can check our webinars page. Just go to magalix.com, go to resources, and click live webinars, and you'll see all of our upcoming webinars. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Everyone, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.